and then this
Recognizing a
one.
quorum, the
Or a
chair
little bit
opens
short.
the March 17th, 2025 meeting of the Community Housing Committee.
So that's
This
fine.
meeting is being held in a hybrid model, both in person in the hearing room of Yarmouth Town Hall, 1146 Route 28, and remotely via the virtual computer platform Zoom. Committee members may participate in person or through remote participation pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency signed into law on June 16, 2021, and extended through March 31st, 2025. The information to access this meeting via Zoom was published on the agenda with the town clerk and on the town's website with a minimum 48-hour notice to the public. The public is welcome to attend in person or remotely. This meeting is being recorded. We will do a roll call of the community housing members that are here. Lee?
Lee Hamilton present.
Drew?
Drew Kraus, present.
John Barr present. Greg?
Greg Wheeler, present.
Josh?
Josh Trot, present.
And recognize that we have two members of the Affordable Housing Committee.
So let me get,
Well, we also have two members on, do we have any members on Zoom?
That's what he's talking
Oh, okay, sorry.
But you should acknowledge them.
so I'm gonna try,
That was-
can you let those two?
I didn't see any on Zoom, but
Trying to go in?
That's what they're
Yeah, hold on,
fussing about.
yeah, bump them up to whatever, panelists.
You can at least
Mary's
acknowledge,
taking
do you know who they
okay.
are?
No, I don't know who's on Zoom.
No.
It's-
Sorry. And I thought instead of switching to the Housing Trust, we should acknowledge who's on our committee.
They've been waiting.
So we'll be starting about half an hour late. Yeah, 2:36.
Oh, meeting ended.
There you go. That was quick.
I'll go home.
That was a quick
So,
meeting. Late
did we
start,
adjourn?
short meeting.
We can watch the parade now.
Never happens.
Oh, I was saying that I marched in that parade when I was a kid in a Catholic summit, drum and bugle corps, and we were called the Two Black Protestants because we belonged to this Catholic group. And we got really badly treated in that parade, really badly treated, grabbed on the butt and all kinds of things. The St. Patrick's Day parade in Boston,
Oh, in Boston?
many, many years ago. So it was a drum and bugle, so the gals had rifles, so they whacked the guys with the rifles. And I said, never do that again, never go there again. And here I am at Callahan, and everyone said, wait a minute, I'm at Callahan, leave me alone. You're not live, right? People not listening to me.
It's a very good question, Lee.
Okay.
I wonder if they are.
You get
I
that all,
mean, Miss
Mary?
O'Callahan.
Anybody on Zoom, Mary?
Yes, so
they call you
Joanne
O'Callaghan
Crowley
for now.
and Palm,
Okay.
so.
So we'll recognize Joanne Crowley and Palm
Probably so.
on Zoom attending the meeting. And with that, we'll turn it over to the Barrett Planning Group.
Great. All right. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Should I wait till this is over?
Yeah, that might be a good idea. The other thing I'd suggest is we should at least acknowledge, Mary?
Hi, Joanne, can you hear us?
Yeah, there we go.
And Palm, can you hear us? Hey,
You
Palm.
have to unmute. After 2 years, you'd think we'd all be ready to go on that, but not. We're not. None of us are. I always forget.
Joanne, can you hear us?
Is the TV volume? Oh, yeah, you have to join audio.
Well, just continue because they can see us.
Okay. But I don't think they can hear us if we haven't joined audio. Can you give, Pom, can you give a thumbs up if you can hear me? Oh, okay, is that a thumbs up? No.
No, she was scratching the back of her head.
Oh, there we go.
All right, cool. Great.
Be a
Okay.
delay.
So I know we're waiting to figure out why we can't hear you, but I think in the meantime, I will just start explaining the goal for
Before we do
today.
that, can we just do introductions, make sure we know who's all here?
Sure, that's,
Well, because we haven't done the Affordable Trust members.
Well, yeah, because there's Affordable Trust here. People need to know who's gathered and why we're here.
absolutely,
Some introduction should be done.
okay.
That's right.
Josh Trott, Community Housing Committee, Energy Director at Housing Assistance.
Greg Wheeler, Community Housing Committee.
I thought we were-
Bob Lawton, Housing Trust.
Mark Forest Housing Trust.
John Barr, Community Housing.
Drew Kraus, Community Housing.
Lee Hamilton Community Housing Representative to the Community Preservation Committee.
I want to add that Drew Kraus is a representative from the Housing Authority.
Kathy Williams, Town Planner.
Deirdre Gaquin, new incoming member of the Community Housing Committee, new member on the Planning Board.
Barbara Lavoine, member of the MUC Committee.
Sharon Weimer, member of the MUC Committee.
Roby Whitehouse, member of the Mattakese Utilization Committee, also known as the MUC Committee.
Mary Wagon, Affordable Housing.
Alexis Lanzalotta, Barrett Planning Group.
Fiona Gain with Barrett Planning Group.
And Bill
we
Scott
have-
is in the audience.
Bill Scott, Assistant Town Administrator.
Don't want to leave you out, Bill.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks everybody for being here. And then we also have Palm and Joanne on Zoom, although I'm not sure if we can hear them yet.
They can, Pam, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Pamela Sonkhorst from the Community Housing Committee.
And Joanne, you want to give us a sound check?
Sound check. This is Joanne Crowley, member of the Community Housing Committee.
Wonderful.
Wonderful, great.
We close
Okay.
that box.
So the materials that we prepared in your meeting packet, I just want to walk you through them. So for the last meeting, we had compiled the notes from the MUC 1, the Run Amok session, and tried to group ideas together that, and tally how often they showed up, to help kind of narrow it down and channel the conversation a bit. And then our task after the last meeting was to do that again, and to propose a few different scenarios at a moderate and elevated level. And so we have done that, but I do want to just start by saying that these scenarios, you're not being asked to conclude today picking one of these precise scenarios. You're not limited to that. These were just meant to spark conversation, so I just want to walk you through kind of how we came up with these. Another piece that you have, so you may see this tentative ranking from Housing MUC 2. So this handout that was in your packet. And what we tried to do was we tried to take those big ideas and just kind of assign them a weight based on how many people prioritized them and if they indicated whether they were their first or second or third priority. And this is not meant to be a vote. Again, you're not ending today necessarily picking, you're not limited to one of these at all. But it allowed us to kind of weigh the level of input relating to a particular idea. So anything that someone indicated was a first priority, we tentatively just said, okay, we'll count that as 3 points versus 2 points for a second priority versus 1 point for a third priority. And again, it was just a method of weighting. So when we did that, the topic that really seemed to be the strongest, and this was also kind of touched on in other ideas, so sometimes it's a bit hard to shake out and exactly put someone's feedback into one of these buckets, but the general idea of housing variety, so that really relates to quite a few of the ideas anyway, which hopefully makes it pretty reasonable ask to narrow down to something that includes housing variety. And then I tried to also indicate the additional notes that someone may have said in relation to that. So for example, let's see, Bob Lawton with talking about housing variety, also had mentioned the need to keep open space, and different types of housing would be kind of in relation to how much land is used. And so we tried to indicate those notes as well. You may notice some people are actually kind of counted in multiple places. And that was, again, where I was saying it was a little hard to squeeze some of these things exactly into a particular box. So as an example, people who spoke to the veteran supportive housing, in some instances that was kind of an additional call out, and in other times it was just the particular idea that they had. So this just allowed us to kind of shake out the ideas to what really kind of bubbled to the top. But that said, I think nearly every single one of these categories, there's no reason it couldn't be integrated into the final idea that you come up with today. So again, while this is not meant to be a vote or anything like that, I do think, Mary, is the intent, is this going to be part of minutes or something to help you create minutes that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so if you see anything incorrect, if we incorrectly captured what you had shared, please let Mary know, and that way that can be corrected, because we want it to reflect what your actual input was, what your actual intent was. So that's, and then, so the things that kind of bubbled to
Recording.
Should I
Okay.
repeat any of that?
Still fun.
Okay.
We're fine.
Okay, thank you.
We're fine.
God love them.
So housing variety, having mixed use, which at first we had together, and then we separated it to people talking about community uses with residential versus there was some talk of commercial uses as well. And then you can see here, I actually then just brought it back together again, because the way it was talked about, it seemed to actually come together, particularly when you see the moderate versus elevated ideas, how we handled that. Reuse of the current building also really kind of jumped up. And the way that we talk about that in the scenarios, because there's still information coming out about that, we're just suggesting in the scenarios that that be prioritized if feasible. And that is the type of thing that, depending on where the town is in the planning process, it's the type of thing that you could get helpful input from potential developers through an RFI, request for information, depending on what, they can tell you what is most feasible, most doable for them with the information that they have. And then veteran supportive housing and the housing authority, those also kind of bubbled to the top. And so in our scenarios, the way that we talk about that is, again, it's within, it can easily be tied into that idea of housing variety. So we'll kind of speak to that little by little. And then other ideas that, again, just kind of in sequence. I'm on page 2 now. The idea of clustering housing, protecting undisturbed land. It's really great that we now have feedback from the other groups too, because you can see how the open space and water group talked about that, and recreation. So we do have some other input to help guide the conversation today as well. The idea of having some sort of preference, whether it was, Lee, I believe you mentioned veterans and municipal worker preference. Greg, you had mentioned continuing to look into the possibility of an actual set-aside for municipal employees. I know we had talked a little bit about kind of needing to confer with legal counsel about that, and beyond what's provided for in under state law currently. So, and then single family, that one was a little tricky, because single family was talked about kind of as just housing variety, but also very specifically if you're talking about a partnership with an entity such as Habitat for Humanity that's going to be affordable housing in particular. But when you're talking about it with something like encouraging ADUs as part of it, that's unless Habitat comes up with another model that they are working with, that would not be that type of model. But if you put together the idea of single family, that actually would bubble up higher to 8 points, if you will. So I talk about that in 2 different ways in our scenarios. Then that idea of senior-friendly, accessible housing versus senior age-restricted housing. I know there was some back and forth on that for some participants about, even after the meeting, we had some additional feedback about if someone was kind of changing their response on that. So again, please let us know if we did not capture what you were sharing about that. Bob, for example, I think you had said when you were talking about it being in partnership with the housing authority, that would then be age restricted, correct? Yeah, so that, just trying to distinguish those ideas. And then other notes that were not included in those above ideas, just kind of, again, those conversations about bringing solar into the site, some concerns about the switching with Housing Authority and Forest Road, so I'm sure we'll continue to talk about that. And then also, I think all of the other kind of side comments we did put into the table itself. And then just other further thoughts that might guide our conversation today. That housing variety, which bubbled to the top, that can include carve-outs, for example, for supportive housing for veterans or housing authority partnership, single family, such as with Habitat, or partitioning off part of the site to look at whether there's a possibility to partner with a for-profit developer to create some single-family homes with those ADUs. Again, that's kind of a case study that I am very curious to see how it plays out. I know Barnstable is looking at that because that could be a really great example for communities to look to, depending on if they find an interested developer who can make that happen. So that housing variety, you can include those carve-outs for some of these very specific ideas, and I think that's really helpful to remember with it being a 70-acre site. When we get to the scenarios, we did estimate how much of the site is already disturbed as well. And so just kind of, you do have space to work with depending on what else goes on the site. So, and then also just other kind of thoughts, the group may need more information to decide on partnerships and carve-outs for specific housing needs. We really want to understand, so I proposed in the scenarios, we proposed, and in consultation with staff as well, we proposed just throw out some numbers for you, but we want to hear from you today. Do those numbers resonate or not? So I'll explain our kind of basis for those. And there was interest in getting that building survey and the RFP for the Old Forest Road site that was shared. And then also just a reminder that the videos from the other groups would be posted on the MUC site. Have they been posted? I haven't checked. I think that was the
These reports have.
Okay.
What's that?
So the reports are on the MUC
Yes.
webpage, but not quite the videos yet, right? But these are good.
Yeah, oh no, these are great.
Really good.
Yeah, those are great.
The videos would go to Channel 8.
Okay. So are there any questions on just kind of what we did with your input before we get to the scenarios that we just want to, as a launch point for our
But you don't have feedback yet.
Sorry?
You're not asking for feedback yet, you're asking for...
Well, if you have feedback on this, sure. I think the feedback would probably more come with talking about the scenarios themselves. I just wanted to go over kind of how we thought through the input, because I know at the end of the meeting last time, I said, well, we need to step back and think about this more on our end too, because it's kind of hard to, live process it all. And so we did that. We met with staff and with Bill and just kind of talked through how to take all of this and almost quantify it in a way that allows this group to talk about next steps.
Is there
Yes.
an extra copy of the blue highlighted one? I don't have that.
Oh, so I think the meeting packets should be right in that corner.
Thank you. Yeah, the blue highlighted one's not in this.
That's right, because you came before I had those. Friday, that's what happened. Yeah.
Oh, apologies. Okay, so do they have this in their printed one now?
Everybody should have two documents in a
Yes.
blue.
Okay, great.
Well, I didn't print them out in color, but My colored printer would be defunct
you.
by now.
All right. So then, our meeting goal for today then is to come to consensus on a final scenario that we will then put into, a 2-page or so memo to bring forward to the MUC group. And so the chosen scenario, it does not need to be one of these options below. Again, I will continue to say that because I don't want you to feel like you're limited. So these are just meant to guide the discussion, and they're based on group input from our previous 2 meetings. You can mix, match, combine, expand upon, otherwise change any of these. Oh, it says above, it should say below. Any of those ideas. But the goal is to leave the meeting today with a proposal that this group feels comfortable verbalizing to MUC. Again, as I referred to it as icing on the cake, if you have thoughts about where, location, this group doesn't need to say that definitively today, but it could be even in the written proposal, that group members discuss possible locations for carve-outs, things like that. And we can give some of that feedback, but that's not requirement. That's just, it's great if we do get there. It's fine if we don't. But for each scenario, again, that moderated and elevated scenario, that was kind of part of the original ask. So scenario 1 is really just residential, focused on the residential pieces that this group has discussed. And I know the numbers seem very specific. When it comes to issue an RFP, you would not get this specific. It's the only reason we did that for these numbers is because we wanted to kind of look to the HPP and show you how that would extrapolate out if you took those numeric goals and guides from that. So in your housing production plan, there's an annual goal of 62 SHI eligible units with a rough 80 to 20% split between rental and ownership. And then there's kind of different percentages for bedroom counts as well that the HPP suggests to encourage for rental versus ownership. It does also get into income tiers. I didn't get into that for this because it just would have been a lot. But so what we just did, again, just for purposes of discussion, you don't need to stick to this, but we just took that 1-year goal for the elevated or the moderate, and then we just doubled it for the elevated because that could get the town what's a 2-year certified HPP, which gives the town some reprieve, whereas meeting the 1-year target would give you a 1-year safe harbor for 40B proposals. So that's just how we got the basic numbers there. And then when we just took that 80-20 split and applied it to those numbers, you can see how, and the bedroom counts, you can see how it kind of shakes out. And I mean, it gets tricky, especially like when you look at, if we did the elevated scenario as is, 135 units, which is actually a little over the double because the HPP specifies that for the ownership, the targets, they actually suggest having some additional at kind of more workforce levels were not built into there, but they wouldn't be on the SHI, so we did build that into the elevated scenario. But fitting 35 ownership units on the site, as it gets more challenging. So we just threw these numbers out here for conversation. It is not meant to be limiting in any way. Then we also looked at we talked, just wanted to give a little bit of guidance about the building types that you're talking about, because it's one thing to talk about mixed building types, but what might that look like? So if we're talking about, for rental, I mean, it is just a fact that the apartment buildings are generally more cost effective, but that doesn't mean you have to stick with that. You could certainly combine it with townhouses, just understanding that the more intricate you get with that combination, it may mean more local dollars being put into a project. So for example, the Lawrence Hill in Wellfleet example that I had shared at the last meeting in your packet, that actually had a really nice mix of quite a few townhomes and I think one larger apartment building, but there was a lot of local and regional funding put into that project. The town of Wellfleet alone put in almost $2 million. Other town CPA funds were put into it as well. And then the county had ARPA dollars that they were able to put in addition to the home fund. So that had, a lot more kind of variation in the building types, whereas the Governor Prent's proposal I had also shared, which again, that has not even gone to permitting yet. That was just the proposal. It had 2 larger apartment buildings on it, and then some townhouses that were to be a separate phase as ownership. So it's just something to keep in mind. You're certainly not limited to that, just understanding how the subsidy shakes out. For ownership, most likely for affordable, your partner, although you likely wouldn't specify that at the outset, but I mean, Habitat really is the nonprofit partner who builds that type of unit on Cape Cod. And I know in the recent past, they had also been looking at duplex models as well. I'm not sure if they've done more with that, but it could be worth talking to Habitat about that. And then I know on the Governor Prent's site as well, for the ownership units, for the townhouses, they were actually going to do workforce for that. I think their fingers were crossed that the Commonwealth Builders Program, which is a workforce housing program, would expand. Right now, it's only actually eligible on Cape Cod for Barnstable as a gateway community. But I think that may change. These things change all the time. So that was in the proposal that had gone forward to the town of Orleans for that project. The development team had indicated, is a wait and see approach to if Commonwealth Builders Program would expand and they could have workforce ownership townhouses, or they might reconsider it as rental. But then for, in the elevated scenario for the building types, so if you were, to be honest, because I don't have a lot of case studies or examples that I'd be familiar with to draw from for that, but if you were to do part of the site to, partner with a for-profit developer for the single family with ADUs, that would be for those market rate ownership units. So that's just how we got those numbers for that scenario 1. Again, it's purely based on taking the HPP multipliers and applying them. You can suggest otherwise. One point that I wanted to raise, I know that there's a lot of concern and interest in bringing sewer to the site, because protecting the wells. There's various wells. You won't see them on the map that we prepared for you today, because this is really just zoomed in on the parcel itself, but you can see it on some of the prior maps that were shared, like the context map and whatnot. The wells that are surrounding the site very much need to be protected. I did just want to point out the moderate scenario, when you take those HPP numbers, it works out to about 95 bedrooms. To comply with Title V, if you did not bring sewer and you were aiming to bring it under 90 bedrooms, that would be a reasonable, that you could pare it down. I'm not suggesting that, because obviously I think sewer makes, for many reasons, it's more environmentally the way to go. But that is, you would be very close. It just worked out to being close to that 90 bedroom threshold anyway. So that's the scenario 1, again, just looking at the residential. Scenario 2 is suggesting looking at that and carving out some specialized housing as well. As I mentioned, you're not limited to these. You could say, well, let's take the specialized housing and actually reduce the numbers in scenario 1, so it works out to about the same number of units. That would be fine. But so what this is suggesting would be carving out an additional acreage to do veteran supportive housing. I think Soldier On had indicated in previous conversations that if they could do reliably look at 25 units, they'd be able to bring services as well. And I think when they had previously shared an acreage amount, they were assuming it would just be one site. But if this is on a larger site, you could probably look at a smaller amount. I mean, I threw 3 acres out there, cutting in half what I think they had suggested, Mary, originally, which was like 6 acres or something.
They were thinking that would need that much acreage, but really, if you did something that was mixed use, you could reduce that dramatically.
Yes, yeah.
Repeat that, please.
So when we were looking for land for Soldier On.
Okay.
Or supportive services, they wanted a larger lot. Because I think they wanted to have like community gardens and a nice layout on the land.
Okay.
Of course, they come from a much more urban area, so they probably think we have tons of land down here. But we never got into more details than that. But I think if this site, has mixed uses, including commercial uses and municipal uses and these recreational opportunities, they could be on a much smaller footprint because all they have to worry about is the building, not all these other things like shared parking and shared uses.
That's a good point. So honestly, the 3 acres is, probably.
Even the 3 acres might be
is
too high.
Yeah. So, but again, just the idea, you don't have to get this prescriptive in an RFP. I'm just trying to help you understand the ability of the site to accommodate some of these different things that we're talking about. So, and then what it refers to with the, for the housing authority, depending on where the housing authority is in their process, I'm not sure if the RFP has actually been released yet, but it has. Thank you for sharing the RFP. But I think, the housing authority is going to assess responses they get, and I think this is aiming to not close out that ability to partner, but it's also, I think, would be preemptive to directly say that. And besides, there's also an opportunity, even if the housing authority did, if the RFP process was successful for that site, I mean, there's no reason, presumably, the town still couldn't partner with the housing authority to do other things on the site as well. So this is just saying maybe a wait and see. It's too early, I think, to say much more than that. But you certainly could. That's why we call this mixed residential plus specialized housing. You'd have the soldier on carve out. You potentially could work with the housing authority to make that the rental housing on the site age restricted senior housing or otherwise. And then the third scenario is just having those mixed residential types plus some community uses, I'm calling it here. But so this, depending on feasibility, again, a lot of unknowns here, but I know there's an interest in repurposing the existing gym and auditorium for a community center and other recreational uses. And then there was also a suggestion to have kind of a village center in that area of the site that could include that community center. I'm pretty sure I just literally copy and pasted this part because it was great. Meeting rooms, exercise center, game room, et cetera. But also having the potential for small shops or offices with housing above. So some of those rental units we're talking about, they could be in that form of mixed use, commercial and residential. So what we looked at for the moderate versus elevated with that is that, moderate would just be taking the housing and using the, most likely, probably more just a community focus. You're reusing the building for recreational uses, things like that. But you certainly could do more. We left that one pretty broad because I think it requires a lot more dialogue about how there's a big difference between repurposing an existing building for a community center and zoning to have a really active village center with mixed use and whatnot. So I think that one we would need more kind of input from this group on. But so that's how we came up with the scenarios. Not stuck with them, just wanted to explain them. And then the only other thing on the second page here, again, just a reminder that the meeting goal is to come to consensus on a final scenario that we can just write a kind of a 2-page memo about that would be proposed to MUC. And it says, again, while not critical for the conversation to move forward, we can also discuss locations on the site if there's interest from this group. So just for references, you have that. About 35 acres of the site appears to be disturbed. So, I mean, that was just, I'm emphasizing about, that was just, hand-drawn measure there on GIS.
I thought that was really interesting fact.
Yeah, so, and by disturbed, we're not just talking about the buildings themselves.
50% of the site is disturbed. 35 acres.
Yeah, and then so another piece that we wanted to include also, I didn't realize this, but apologies if this was included in an initial memo. I may have just lost sight of it, but the trail network on the side there as well. So, yeah. Any questions about what we have here or comments?
Yes. I have a couple of concerns I would like to express. One is that I don't know where the duplicates for Habitat for Humanity came from, because I don't know that they've ever done that. And when I was talking about single-family homes, that's not what I was visioning. Because I think that, I know people who own different halves of duplexes, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good.
Okay.
The other is even though I think ADUs are valuable, it takes more land.
Yes.
So that's a concern, given a limited amount that we might be able to utilize for housing. And the other scenarios, I'm not really clear on there's a lot of pressure, I think, to not build in the Yarmouth Housing Authority RFP lot. There's a lot of pressure coming from different directions to negate that and bring it to this site. And I do not support that, because they've got a lot of land. They've got a piece of land that they have the RFP for, and I think they're being conservative on what they want to build there, and I don't think they're overbuilding. I haven't looked at the RFP. But, so I'm bringing that concern forward. And to, how we do some of the other diversified housing and how it gets funded remains to be seen. I think they're great ideas, but I've learned from Mary that I didn't know before, when you have a local preference, if somebody moves into a rental with a local preference and then they move out, that local preference disappears. So that's not a permanent local preference. So how we do some of that so that we can provide the housing that's needed for the town, because I'm well aware of that, is a big, big question. But those are my three concerns that I really felt a need to express.
So you'd be supportive of some type of preference for municipal employees that would be in perpetuity, regardless of whether it'd go on that 10% inventory or not?
Well, if there's a way to fund it.
Yep.
But there's a separate way to fund it, because it's not going to be through a lot of the standard funding that we know that we can get.
Right.
And I'm not aware of Habitat ever having done duplexes.
We had a very small lot a while back, and we brought it to them, and they said, well, it's so small, would only be able to have 4 parking spots, and it'd be 2 duplexes.
Okay.
But this might not be as crammed as that other
Right, and one of the
spot.
things we can think about, and I know we're not talking about the other proposals, but the open space, they're talking about, I mean, we can build a housing, if Habitat would do it, a cluster development, where you don't plant grass. I mean, where you can have wildflower gardens and so forth. So those are other ideas that didn't come forward, but I thought was really, really innovative in the open space section, that we can think about doing things out of the box.
Yeah, that's great. May I comment just on a couple of those pieces? The Habitat, the duplex suggestion would really, I think that it had come out of a conversation I had with them a couple years ago, where they were considering potentially coming up with they have kind of a typical model that they do, right? And so they were looking at, part of the concern was financing the mortgagers that they worked with. They weren't sure they'd be able to make that happen. So my understanding was that it's something they were considering. I have not since had a conversation with them. That's something that the town, would need to look further into. And I think if there was interest, that was more suggesting it potentially for the elevated model. Again, just with using the numbers from the HPP, when you extrapolate out that number of ownership units on the site, just suggesting for saving space as an option. You don't. This group might say, no, we would really just want single family, and that's fine. That is typically what Habitat does anyway. And the lot sizes on the Governor Prent's proposal, I don't know exactly. Their proposal didn't give very, very detailed site drawings, but they look like very small. It's very clustered, and so I think you could do something like that. And I hear you on if you're having the ADU for market rate units, yes, that would then you would need.
It takes half an acre.
So yeah.
And I live in a affordable housing development where it's a quarter of an acre, and that's fine by me. Okay. Except I wish my neighbor didn't use Downy fabric softener. But other than that, it's a quarter of an acre or a cluster development. And I don't know if they've done cluster development where they're closer. I don't know that.
I don't know if they have. I just know that they've proposed it for Orleans. So I think it's something that they're, certainly able to.
Right.
That they've, worked with other development teams.
So those are my 3 concerns that I felt a need to express. So thank you. What's their face?
Want to
Mary?
go to the people that are on Zoom first?
Okay.
Because usually we do them last, and they.
That's a good idea.
So, Pam, do you have any comments?
I do.
Hey, Pam.
I think I like the idea of all three, if that's possible. But in terms of land available, yeah, that's my only comment.
You would be good with any of the three scenarios?
Well, if it's possible, we can maybe make it all together. Like we have the community use and the mixed residential and the specialized.
Oops, we lost you.
What's the third thing you're saying, Pam?
Like combine all three of them together, if that's a possibility.
Right. Okay.
All three scenarios is what I would be in favor for,
Yeah,
if
so
possible.
it's really combining scenarios 2 and 3. So you have the residential with the specialized housing and those mixed uses on the site. So
correct.
Okay.
And I agree with Palm here. With the 35 acres that's already cleared on this site, if we're looking at about 12 acres for 135 units, now I know we want green spaces and things like that as well. It feels like there's still plenty of room to go bigger instead of limiting ourselves here.
Well, you haven't looked at the economic plan yet. I mean, because we're not the only ones at the table.
I understand that, and I'm not looking at money at all. I'm thinking about what I would like here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of
What
turn.
helped with drawing it out is I saw that, yes, you could do all three scenarios, but it's almost like you could do them in phases. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because the school needs to
Right.
move, you know what I mean? If they opt for a new school building, that means they would build the new school, and then the old school area would be available for redevelopment. So I started thinking about maybe this all being phased 1 and phase 2.
Yeah. Good. That's okay.
How about Joanne?
Good afternoon. Of the three scenarios, I think the focus of scenario 1, that it's addressing the needs based on what we've said in the housing production plan, I think is the way I'd like to go. We're housing. I think we should focus on that and not necessarily other aspects of it. So I found scenario 1 and both the moderate and the elevated. Elevated, I thought were an awful lot of units, high number of units. But I do think the fact that it's in sync with the housing production plan makes it one that I'm more in favor of that one than the others.
Greg?
It's rare I don't have an opinion, and I'm not saying that I don't have an opinion. I'm in favor of all of them. Like I said, I'd like to see as much housing and as much varied housing as possible. I mean, I've drawn up a little thing here. I won't go through it. I've got a space for Habitat for Humanity in the back with single-family houses that could maybe be used for affordable workforce home ownership. I've got municipal housing where the school is for first responders, townhouse style. In the front where the gravel pit is, I've got maybe a building there that could be soldier on for veterans and their services. And then I've got where the school is, maybe 5 or 6 buildings that could be affordable housing for families and elderly people in town. And keeping the middle area as wide open as possible for athletics, things like that. As much green space as possible. Elevating the electric panels, maybe putting some parking under there. So you kind of kill two birds with one stone. You could actually probably put some charging stations in there as well. I guess I did just go through the whole thing. That's not what I do, so.
How much land does the school think they need to do, how many acres?
8, he said 8.
8 for one.
The letter, Bob, for that is on the MUC website under the team, the superintendent's letter.
And how much land does the school occupy now?
Tell you in
Whether amorphous, it's no real edge, but they're on the same.
Is it,
And,
Some of the fields are related to
right.
Hmm.
Do we know, I know when we had someone from Recreation share with us what's in use.
Right.
Just even looking at the map, which now that we switched what we were using for the base map here, and now I can see there's actually some other little disturbed pieces that I did not include. So I guess I would say it's slightly more than, not much, but slightly more than 35 acres. But do we know which fields are actively in use? Because we had heard, you know, there's not.
Yes.
The school's not there anymore, so.
Right, but the
It is,
athletic
but-
fields.
But I mean, the ball field,
The ball, okay.
So we have soccer teams that are
There you
utilizing
go.
the football field. The baseball field is going to be utilized by DY at least for a short period of time this spring. And then the fields, I would say the fields that, it's difficult for me to describe, the fields that are the furthest away from Matikes and the furthest away, that down in that last corner,
Closer to
is
the-
utilized on some occasions, but not all occasions, for special events, whether it's National Night Out or things like that. And we have soccer games that are taking place in multiple locations on the property. So most of these fields are being used just for different purposes.
Okay.
those fields are in the upper part, Roby, where the track, or whatever, it looks like a track.
Looks like a
It was
track.
the old football field.
That's what the football field
Yep, it was a
is.
football field. It is being used for soccer.
Okay.
And there is like a track field in between, but they're utilizing that as well.
It's a great place, because it never gets too hot, because it's surrounded by woods. It's really a very nice place to have recreational activities.
I guess I'd be concerned with 8 acres for the school, whether that's a little much. If you look at the current, that's a very inefficient, as Mark was saying earlier, very inefficient way to utilize that space. So if you built a pool without pods, you probably wouldn't need 8 acres. I'm not
It's
sure.
a single floor now, too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, no.
Huh.
You know more than I.
His letter really indicated 6 to 8 acres, so.
And was that including like fields and whatnot?
Yeah, that makes
There
more
might be
sense.
some outdoor area,
Yeah.
plus the parking.
Because right now, again, this is just like super duper fast. Looking at like the buildings themselves and the parking lot look like they take about a little over 4 acres. But that, I mean, when you add in the fields, I don't know what fields the school's currently using. I don't know if they're also counting the solar. I'm just
Right.
zooming in on the school and the parking lots themselves.
And I think we heard on the solar that either could be, it's going to go out of, not warranty, it's going to go out of use, what, 2027?
2027 was what, isn't that when the solar contract is up?
Contract.
I believe it's in year 12 out of 20 right now.
Oh, so longer.
And who's benefiting from that solar power? Is it the school or?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Contracts with them.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't find out a ton of information on it, but other than the fact that the contract is with the school itself, so I would assume it's the school that's.
Did the town pay for the solar panels, or are they leased, or?
It was, I believe it was a CVEC project, and the town is benefiting, or the school was benefiting from that
Okay.
energy resource, so the SRECs and the credits were going back to the school.
But I don't think the school or the town owns them.
Correct.
Right,
They're probably leased, why would you buy?
right.
Especially with new technology. But those could be moved, I guess, near the end, because this isn't going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and like, yes, they could be moved. I have no idea what the cost would be or who would like incur that. I mean, I assume that would be some fairly significant cost.
Well, if you're near the end of the lease.
We're 8 years from the end then?
That's what Bill said, we're
Yeah.
8 years from the end.
8 years from the end of the lease?
One of the things about moving them is they depreciate quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
The solar panels, so it may not be worth.
No, it'd be new in a different location with something going
Right.
town and or the school.
If I could just jump in, I know at one point we were looking at a solar development on Workshop Road. That did not come to pass. I mean, it's conceivable. I think it's critical that the solar panels get moved for the purposes of developing the site. The sooner the better. And if it's being moved to town-owned property, then something can be renegotiated with respect to the use of that site. The town could make an agreement to have an extended lease, allow the developer or the owner or whoever to essentially put in new panels, more I mean, there's a way to work that out. I don't see that as a huge problem in negotiating something like that. But I do think in terms of thinking of the redevelopment of the site, all of those solar panels just have to go. And we just have to, as a municipality, figure out a way to make an accommodation. Like I said, there are other places where we can move this. It's certainly going to be a cost, but I think there's a way to maybe find another site, like at Workshop Road, evaluate that, but then negotiate a longer-term lease so that there can be an extension of some sort. So those are all things that can be figured out later on, but I don't think that's going to be a problem.
May I add one piece of information? In our grant research, I do know, we were looking originally a lot at the Housing Works grants and the infrastructure grants, but there's also there's so many grant programs available, some specifically for site readiness, and they help with things like that, clearing solar panels or whatever else needs to be done to prepare the site for development. So I think even whatever the cost may be, I mean, as you said, there are options.
Yeah, it's just that I don't see that as a deal breaker at all, and I don't think, I think, quite frankly, it's such a large area for solar that it makes sense to relocate it, given all the other ideas that are being talked about.
Well, who is the
Probably
entity
more
that would do
efficient
that?
panels and things available now
Exactly.
anyway.
Exactly.
It'd be the town, Lee.
The town.
I couldn't hear what
It
you
would be
just said.
the select board.
I mean, the technology is improving every day, and there's probably,
more compact?
there's more compact systems, probably more
Yeah.
efficient systems than are in that field already. And if you just look at the redevelopment of the site and RFPs and everything, you're probably going to be close to that 8-year period anyway. Exactly. And if not, then, like Mark said, I think you can negotiate your way out of it.
About like, 3.8 or so acres that are taken up by the solar.
They're still being leases.
But in any plan, I think we should designate a spot for a school. Because I don't personally think they're going to be able to go on Station Avenue. I think we're done, hopefully, with that. And a West Yarmouth school would be a good thing. But we should say, okay, there would be a school area, so that we don't say it's all going to be housing. A lot of it will be,
And are
but there
they,
are some other areas.
are they,
If I may, regarding that, the Manikey's committee has to deliver 3 plans to the select board. One of them is going to contain a sort of a grayed out area for the school. The superintendent's letter is online. It's under the team's proposals, and it documents their timetable, what they need. And so rather than waiting for their timetable to move forward, we've just said, okay, Plan 3 or whatever C is going to have X number of acres set aside. So as you do the planning, economic, and everybody else does, then the Manikey's committee says, okay, here's where the school might be able to go. Obviously, you usually put those near the front of the site for visibility and things like that, especially elementary.
Makes sense.
But it's going to be considered. And as far as the solar panels, we don't ask that these committees care or want to get into the details of what happens to these. If you think they need to go, that's a recommendation you make, and that is for the next committee, the board, and others.
Yeah, the housing could be phased depending on,
Probably will be, sure.
you know, we don't have to hold all of it for
Right.
the school redevelopment. But once the school, you know, if the new school is built, it's on this site, there becomes disturbed land available for some more mixed-use housing. Do you know what I mean? So,
Or something.
yeah.
Do you have anything else, Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to go over a little bit. I thought we were going to, as part of our assignment today, take a look at a map and then figure out the site plan and then figure out where we would put certain things. So that's what I've spent my time working on with Bob. And in looking at the site plan, looking at that photograph that we have in front of us, let me start off with where we've been talking about where to put your higher density housing. And that would be taking and again, our focus has been trying to look at the area of the site that's already disturbed and to try to leave as much of the undisturbed area, leave that alone or touch it in a limited way. I think Yarmouth residents have become very comfortable with that site the way it is, the ride to the drive-in to Matikes. I think that shaded corridor is very attractive and is an asset in terms of the development of the site. So, but I would take, or we would take, and tell me, Bob, if I'm going too far here, but take those three major buildings that make up the Matikes School, demolish those buildings, use the rubble for another offshore reef. We need another offshore reef in Yarmouth. We can expand the Mo Johnson offshore reef and utilize that site as your principal footprint for your higher density housing. And we don't necessarily need to get into the weeds in terms of veterans or seniors or whatever. I mean, we all know that veterans, seniors, folks, we're in desperate need of housing, including housing for municipal workers. So how that gets figured out and how that gets designed is something to be done later. But on the southern section of the site, starting there and moving in a westerly direction, is where you've got a lot of disturbed area and where you can concentrate most of your higher density housing. So,
The gym and the auditorium building?
yes, the gym and the auditorium building, I mean, the recreation, they're using that, they're getting a lot of, there's something to be said, if you're gonna use a community center, I think of that as an aspect of this community rec center. It's sort of turning into that as it is. So leave that use in that area, definitely. The school, a new school, I would put it as close to the street and as close to the middle of the site as you could, because I think what we want to be able to do is to take the northern section of the site and to use that for as much of other variety and mixed use. There's been a lot of talk about expansion of fields. I heard in one of the MUC meetings was talk about maybe possibly an RFP for an indoor athletic complex, something like that. I think those lend themselves better to the northern part of the site. And so I would try to concentrate the housing, the dense housing in the south east corner of the site where the Matikes buildings are, and remove those and pull those out. And then as you move closer to the west of the site, you can have a bit more of a mix. I think we should, in any of the recommendations, affirm our goals about green energy, renewable energy, solar in terms of the development, net zero development. I think one of the things that we have an opportunity to do in Yarmouth is to create a model housing development using the most advanced green energy, net zero concepts. I think that's something that should be baked into the DNA with all of this project. So I would emphasize that. We've talked about, Bob and I were talking about, with that being the case, it really leaves the northern part of the site to think about a variety of things that relate to what we, because in the other meetings, we know they're talking about economic development, more ball fields, indoor facility, a whole range of other things. And I think those things, those types of uses can be better sorted out on the northern portion of the site. So I think there's plenty of room to do some very exciting housing, but I would concentrate that, like I said, in the southern portion of the site. And then the school, I would put as close to that as you can. See where there's sort of this environmental spot, this delineated with the red line on the western boundary of the site. I would try to get a new school as close to that as possible, leaving almost the entire north.
But in the middle,
In the middle.
right in the middle.
Yeah, but it's close to the street, but yeah, it's sort of in the middle of the site. And I think that lends itself to some exploring further, some exciting economic development, outdoor, and again, outdoor recreation. This is the first time I've heard, a serious discussion of outdoor recreation, indoor complex as being a potential economic development opportunity. There seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm about it, and it sounded like it could be meshed and merged, I believe, with some potential convention or business space or something like that. So there's a way to have a multi-use facility that both supports athletics. And I think that fits in nicely with Yarmouth's ongoing economic development work. I mean, outdoor recreation is a big part of our economic development thinking. So I don't know enough about the details of what those other groups are talking about, but I think if we concentrate the housing in a particular, at least in the initial phases, in one portion of the site, while we further develop and refine some of the possibilities elsewhere, I think there's some value in that. So that was the
does this
discussion
line mean?
that Bob and I had here.
That
does
is
that
very
line mean?
helpful, actually. And the one thing I just wanted to point out, I just quickly taking a look, the parking lots, the 3 buildings, not including the gym and auditorium. I mean, there are some patches of trees between the parking lots, but that general area where the school is about 6 acres that are already where the buildings in the parking lot are. And that is what the moderate scenario 1 included as well. So that is interesting. It kind of works out to that same acreage.
Yeah, and I think you want to keep the school as close to the housing as you can, right? Doesn't that make sense? Even though we're going to have, I'm sure, a lot of more elder community reflected in there, but I think you want to keep it as close to the housing as you can. So moving it closer to the street and further down there, I think, has some opportunities.
I'm not being able to visualize this. I'm thinking that would be, you're talking about really, really dense housing if you're just going to stay within that section and not branch out into the wooded area.
You're assuming 11 units per acre.
So like the scenario 1 moderate, which was about proposing about 6 acres, 10 units an acre.
Okay.
That again, so just to hold it up, like, I just quickly just drew like a shape around, and I did include those tree patches between the parking lots, but that general area is about 6 acres if you don't count the.
I would even extend it down maybe to where you've got that treed area and there's a bare section of land in the middle.
Right, yeah, the gravel, I think you said it was gravel. What is that? What
Used
is
to be
that?
the parking lot. Right?
It's been used.
No, it looked like a
It's been
gravel
used as a parking lot at prior town meetings. Just we can, for the sake of discussion, just leave it there. But I agree with what's been said. That was the same scenario as ours. But as you move closer to the street, I think you have an opportunity to create a bit of more diverse. And if you're going to be doing, let's say, less dense housing, I think it's far better to do that as you approach the main street, the main thoroughfare in that area.
To give you an idea, the Yarmouth Commons is 16 units per acre, I believe. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the advantage in doing it that way is what you're trying to do. What I think we have to be cognizant of is, having compatible uses around the site. So to me, being bordered by this environmentally sensitive area creates an adequate buffer for development, all right? So this provides buffer and protection, all right? You're not encroaching on a neighborhood where there could be some issues. Some folks, obviously, we're staying as far away from the wellhead protection area as we possibly can. So we're being cognizant of the water supply issues that people are concerned about, even though we know that we've been talking about sewering in this site. So I think those are some of the things that we want to be sensitive to, some of the issues that have been raised in the past. With respect to the Housing Authority, I'm happy to cooperate with the Housing Authority on anything and everything. So I don't see that as being exclusive. I happen to believe that we need more public housing, rental housing for seniors and veterans and other folks. And if there's a way to partner with the Housing Authority to do a lot of that stuff, sign me up, I'm in. But I think in terms of approaching the site, if we can do that, then this becomes an area where you have lots of other interesting things to talk about. And this would be the area where I would focus on the new school. All right? And that would be a designated area that would yet to be figured out through future studies and planning and so forth. But I'm in agreement with Mr. Lawton that the town needs to make it clear at some point soon where it would like a school, and I think it would be a mistake to give up on a new school in West Yarmouth because most of the kids that go to the Marguerite Small School are from West Yarmouth. West Yarmouth also happens to be, I don't want to say the stepchild, but it often gets overlooked when it comes to doing things in the town, and I think for the town of Yarmouth to sort of turn its back on the kids that live in West Yarmouth and that come to school in that area, I think that would be I don't think that's the kind of statement or affirmation that we want to embrace at this time. And as everyone knows, Station Ave is just overwhelmed with traffic. So I think we have no choice but to at least have a tentative site designated, and I think that's important for us as a group to do. I would put it more like in that area, keep it away from where we can do some interesting things. And then I think this kind of approach, if we're going to phase it, then it allows us to buy some time in terms of sorting out some of the other stuff that we do. I'm a believer that a phased approach to development, a phased approach to studying it and analyzing it with some, at least conceptually, some broad outlines in terms of what we should do, is something we're thinking about. I think it would be a mistake for the group to be somehow pressed into having it all figured out ahead of time. I think there's some value in phasing your planning, phasing your approach, but having a big picture, trying to have at least in mind some big picture in terms of where you want to do things. If, for example, the kind of economic development opportunities and other things don't pan out, there's no reason why you can't bring over reconsider some other uses. But I think it's important in terms of developing a plan like this to at least start off with at least identifying the area where we can all come into an agreement where we ought to at least be focused on the housing side of it. And I think there's some value in that. So that's my speech.
So there'd be a gym, there'd be an auditorium in this kind of area.
Yeah.
You said it was the southeast area,
It is, yeah.
right?
That's the southeastern portion of the site.
Yeah.
So would there be any other uses, housing, you'd have some recreational uses, is there any other uses? I mean, municipal uses, are you thinking a library would go there well, or?
I'm not a fan of putting libraries in the middle of nowhere. I think there's a value in having libraries. I'm a believer in the village concept where we try to keep village activities thriving. Maybe it's something small, or we talked before about, I think, and I'm very sensitive to what Alexis said, if you want to try to do some things that create more of a village-like environment, like the Pine Hills, Yarmouth or something, you really need to think all of these things through. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do it. I don't think we're opposed to, I don't think the Affordable Housing Trust would be opposed to anything like that. There may be some value in having a small commercial area, like for laundry, for convenience store, daycare, something like that. There may be some real value in having some basic services like that
Well,
there.
services that tie in with housing.
Right.
And for convenience of living there and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm in agreement with what Mark and Bob were talking about in terms of the location of the housing. I'm in favor of a mixed-use approach to the redevelopment of the area around where the gym and the auditorium are now. And if the school were placed where Mark and Bob were talking about it, you could then develop ball fields in between the recreation area that we already have and have those as shared facilities possibly with the school and with the town on weekends and off hours, that sort of thing.
We already have that.
I would like to see the housing, I'd like to see the density closer to what we have at Yarmouth Commons, just to maximize the number of units that we can get on the site. We're running out of land in Yarmouth to build housing. I'm not in favor of transferring the Housing Authority units from Forest Road to this site. I would like to see if that needs to be cut down a little bit for neighborhood resistance or whatever, then that can be worked out once the RFP comes back and they start approaching the design on that. I think in terms of the community center approach to, in part of the mixed-use approach, needs to have, the programming needs to be examined in a lot of detail. I mean, like I said, I think convenience stores or uses that fit with the housing that is built in that area would be important. And I'm not in favor of single-family home development just because it's too land intensive. In terms of, you're talking about at least half-acre lots, maybe closer to acre lots. And I'm not sure that single-family housing fits in with, when we're talking about potentially economic development of the north end of the site, that single-family housing maybe, in my mind, doesn't make a lot of sense in this area.
Are you including the Habitat partnership in that? I ask only because, so you mentioned a half acre or an acre.
I mean, Habitat, they have the ability to work on much smaller pieces of land. And, where you get a piece of land like across the road here where we're able to get 6 Habitat homes
Right.
on a relatively small piece of land. And I just don't know that it fits in with all of the different uses that we're talking about on this site.
Could I just add, we're not talking about an acre?
Pardon?
We're not talking about an acre per house, we're talking maybe a quarter of an acre or a cluster building. I would really like to see some of these units be affordable home ownership. I don't think we're doing enough of the development of that. We leave it up to Habitat all the time, and Habitat will do this. I'm sure they would, but we're not talking about an acre per house. We're talking about either a quarter of an acre or cluster developments, like they're doing, a tight development right across the street here, as we mentioned, because that's the size of their lot. So I would like to see this include some home ownership.
Yeah, I could easily see what is the old football field, that like kind of within that track area, 10 to 12 homeownership units kind of in a clustered setting like that project across the street. I think that could easily fit 10 to 12 units that are 1, 2, maybe even a 3-bedroom in there. And I think those homeownership opportunities are desperately needed.
I agree. But didn't you say the football field was being used? Did you say that the football?
It is being used right
And
now.
soccer.
Yeah, and in the scenario that we laid out, we would avoid that area for housing. we would use that as largely for the athletic fields and expansion of.
I mean, if you wanted to do some home ownership, you could, the access road that now comes into Mattakey School, you could carve out some, some lots in, without disturbing the buffer, without ruining the buffer from the road into the site. You could carve out some single-family homes in there relatively easily and still leave a lot of the trees and things in that area. And then you've still got all the housing kind of concentrated on one side of the site.
John, what part of the site are you talking about?
The road coming in.
The area that's where the
scroll.
extra parking lot is, like gravel pit area, right in that area, and actually
To the east of that.
to the or actually to the west.
Or west.
The west
Yeah,
of
the
that.
west of that.
Yeah, there's some area, it's disturbed.
So it would be west
Right.
of the high-density housing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think,
And you could carve out some smaller for sale home lots down there pretty easily without disturbing the site very much.
Okay.
Can I add just a quick detail with the 6 acres that were referenced in that scenario 1, the moderate? That was, the way it was kind of thought through, I mean, that was including single-family homes. Just, again, looking at the Orleans example, that was like a 5-acre site, 5.5 maybe, and that included 7 carved, as proposed, it's not, again, not permitted, but 7 carved out habitat lots. And then they have, I don't know, 2 or 3 LIHTC rental buildings, and then they're planning townhomes as well. So, yeah, I think.
I don't know what the acreage is, but this is the area that we were
Yeah,
talking
okay,
about,
for the
right
single-family carve-out.
right in here,
Yep.
okay? And the other thing is it's also worth thinking through what some of the affordable housing goals are if you're going to go with that kind of type of development. I know in some communities, if part of the game plan here is to have an area available where maybe there's some municipal employee priority, is that more amenable to a lower density type of development?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think we
To
need.
get the funding for the high density,
Yeah.
right, they won't be able to mix in municipal.
I understand that, but the point, I think one of the things that I think we should really talk about is how many compromises are we going to be making for the purposes of funding? All right, the reality is we know we have a need here in the community. I mean, all the town departments come before the select board talking about how difficult it is to retain employees. So I happen to be, I'm going to just put my cards out on the table. I'm big in trying to do things that help our seniors, our low-income seniors in town, because we just desperately need senior housing. And the other area where we have to be cognizant is obviously the veterans housing. I'm glad to hear that veterans housing, we can do a lot with a modest amount of use of the site. And the other thing we have to start thinking about is municipal employee opportunities, because it's now something that almost every town that's housing challenged is talking about. Provincetown's talking about, Nantucket's doing things, other towns are doing things. We need to put it on our radar screen as well. And I think that type of use lends itself to that kind of development footprint and development approach.
Could I say something? I hesitate to say anything because I am on the committee. But I think this is the proper place to say it, at the Housing Committee. And my impression of what's happened in Yarmouth in regards to housing and everywhere on the Cape, it is so difficult to keep working force here. They're all coming from Plymouth to work here. So there's lots of reasons for maybe the town thinking to do something different. And I've got a different idea. And I know Mary's not wild about this idea because we do have to be cognizant of the neighbors of this site. But I would suggest that you could do the single-family homes, even with ADU, up Chickadee Lane, use part of that is individual lots. You'd have to redo the zoning and lessen the lot size, but put the 80 unit behind the house so that the neighbors don't see it. And you could make, and if the town kept them, this is really the way out idea. So, excuse me for making this silly kind of comment, but I want you to
I just want
think
you to
out of
understand,
the
Sharon,
box.
our charge is to focus on this site.
Right.
All right, Chickadee Lane, if the select board wants to give us Chickadee Lane to look at and a few other places, Bill?
Actually, your land goes to.
Yeah,
It does.
Chickadee Lane is right along here.
Right, so you're saying do it along that road?
You
road.
have houses on one side.
Understood. Thank
You
you.
just need to put single-family homes on the other side, and I'm gonna tell you the crazy part. Make them town-owned property, make them for town employees, teachers, medical, DPW workers, and you'll have the wonderful thing of having the option of another rental piece behind it in the ADU of 600 feet, 600 square feet maximum, and you would have another place for a fireman, or, a single fireman for a while. You would have, there's so many opportunities there, and it's like every other street in the town of Yarmouth. It has two, houses on each side of the street, so the neighbors can't be too wild about it. I know housing is an issue, and I realize that maybe I haven't experienced it like you have, Mary, so, but the reality is, I think they'd prefer to see houses, individual, single-family homes, just like themselves. The crazy part is I would have the town try it, own it. They have control over who rents it. The rent that you collect for each house, you put in its own revolving account, because I know you guys use revolving accounts, and you take and pay the equal amount of what the taxes would be to the general fund, and you keep the revolving fund for the upkeep of the houses that you own. You've got to try something new. You've got to create, and maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but if it doesn't work, then you can decide to sell it 5 years from now.
What happens when the town employee decides to leave and go to another
Got to
job?
develop a policy of how, each of the, if you give 3 houses to the fire and 3 to the police and 3 to the teachers or whatever, however, or 2 to each, however you do it, they've got to develop a policy that's going to work for them. And maybe they all are advised, we have housing for you initially for the first year or 2 years or whatever. We want you to find your own place, but we'll get you settled. I mean, I don't know how that's going to work. I can't figure it all out for you.
That's not a crazy idea. I think that's a great idea, actually.
And you gotta try something new. And that way you also getting the municipal thing. It's not to say you can't use a minimum in your mixed houses for municipal as well. And maybe that would be DPW or, other things. You just gotta try something new. And I know people don't like to hear it, but, you have to rezone so that you can do a smaller lot. And I think we should be sensitive to the neighbors, but it was developed over the years, different ways, because there were unknown owners in this whole land and the golf course and it has a history. So the town engineer actually did this for the owners, so that these owners could have access to supposedly their land, and they had lots, et cetera. So, the John Newton was the engineer at the time. So, that's just an idea that you need to think about to include in your process.
Talking about including Chickadee Lane, take a look at that.
Yes,
Yeah, so we should put that on our list of things to do.
and the crazy idea about the revolving account.
Well, you're talking about, on Chickadee Lane, you're talking about bordering with your Chickadee Lane. You're talking about bordering.
You would access the home off of
Yeah,
Chickadee
yeah, I
Lane.
get that, yeah.
Subdivide the right side of it to have lots, and it would probably be 9 or 10 lots.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if
You
you
could
had
probably
9
even get
lots,
more than that on there. And
depending, but you
I mean,
want to be
if you had little
realistic to your
cul-de-sacs
neighbors,
going in.
because you don't want Mary to
Yeah.
be right. So,
My compromise is that corner, right? You do a cluster subdivision. Instead of having the lot
Corner of Higgins, Kroll, and
go out
Chickadee Lane.
linearly, you cluster them, right, you would, at the corner of Chickadee and Higgins Kroll, you would access a cul-de-sac.
you could cluster, it looks like you've got about close to 150 feet of tree cover there. I mean, you could do little, off of Chickadee Lane, you could do little clusters of houses in there.
well,
Mary,
again,
how would
I'm
that-
trying to think of the people on Chickadee, because Mary is very staunch about this. So whether cluster housing.
Met them yet, I'm sure I will after this meeting.
But if you think cluster housing on the corner of Chickadee is going to be less objectionable to the owners, then, go for it. But
Yeah, I think we just
all
need
I'm
to-
saying is if you do comparable, lots across the street, like every other street in town, then you think about it.
Mary's
I
thinking outside of the
apologize
box.
for
On
talking
that
about it.
corner.
I apologize.
And so it's for rental, it's for it's for
Rental?
single-family detached units
Municipal workers
that are
with
rental.
the ADU behind that also provides a rental space. So it isn't just if you make a 2-bedroom, 1,200 square foot, or, whatever you're gonna do, or 3-bedroom, maybe 1,200 square foot, you can have a family move into one of those houses if the fireman has a family. You have options.
Yep.
Or they could live together. Some of the guys, they live together at the firehouse,
Well, I-
at certain days and nights or whatever.
Yeah, let me just say, in the interest of time, I think we should just put that on the list of things to look at and talk about.
Sorry.
Okay, so Mary, how would that be funded? How would something that's specifically targeted for certain populations be funded? That's a bigger question. We don't need to address all of that now.
So-
Are you seeing that in place of home ownership
I don't-
units?
The town owns it.
I understand
They can do
that.
anything they want.
I understand that.
That's how,
The
the
town
funding
wants
is
to-
they pay for it.
Huh?
They pay for it. And then the rent pays the town back.
Okay, but how do you develop it? How do you get the funding to develop it? We
Can we
don't need
just-
to
well,
resolve that.
That's a different discussion.
That's a different discussion.
Stay on topic.
Okay, I'm just asking, because I know it's,
John, are you done?
You're up to Drew now.
We're up to Drew.
Drew wants to, now, how long, when does this meeting have to end? Is there a time
We
limit?
have the room till 4:30.
Till 4:30? I'm going to hold the floor till 4:29 and a half.
okay, well, give me another minute.
No, I don't have a lot to say. This is very interesting what Sharon just said. It's pretty fascinating. Outside of the box idea, and I think your thing of clustering on the corner is a pretty good suggestion,
We've got a compromise.
Yeah, so
Very
those are good, interesting ideas. I don't know how, yeah, but
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. If the town says, create,
Yeah.
municipal employee housing in that model, trust me, we will figure it out.
how does this go legally with, these houses are reserved for municipal employees? How does that work?
So it's your land.
Yes.
Okay, we've got great town council. It's your land, right?
Right.
It's the town's land. We got great town council. We will figure it out. The one thing that won't happen, it won't get on the subsidized housing inventory. That's okay. That's okay. I think the majority of the rental housing on this property is going to get on the subsidized housing
right.
subsidized housing inventory, which is great. But these out-of-the-box things, you have to work really hard to get them on the inventory, and you do lose control over them in out years.
Right.
So that's okay.
It is okay,
We can do
yes.
something, and Lee,
more
it
than
would be,
okay.
it would be locally funded. You probably wouldn't get state or federal money for that, but you're not talking 100 units, right? So you could do it, and there's an income source. So.
Very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I basically agree with the concepts that are put forward about where to put the the housing, the presumably affordable housing, including the old gravel pit area. So that would be more than 6 acres. That would be more than your moderate amount of acreage. And that sounds good to me. And it sounds to me like we're not assuming that the new school will be built on this property, right? It just might be. Is that the idea?
There's probably a good chance.
It's like,
No other vacant land.
What's that, Bill? Did you want to say something before you left us?
One out of the 3 proposals will have it.
Yeah, we have to identify a tentative area for consideration.
right.
So that's and I think, quite frankly, if we're in agreement on that, that's actually a huge accomplishment, assuming.
You
that
have to
it-
do
it-
that. That is obvious, yes. I get that completely. So I don't have anything brilliant to add to what's already been said.
Lee?
Well, I think it's an interesting thought, an interesting proposal, if it could be funded and how it would be funded and how it would work and all that stuff, but I still do not want us to eliminate home ownership. So I'm
Eliminate
really,
what?
the possibility of home ownership, which we talked about a location for and habitat and all that stuff, so.
Right,
So that's all I have to say.
which would be a different area than the
Correct.
Chickadee Higgins Kroll
Correct.
corner.
I would second what she just said. In just that way, separate idea from the Chickadee Lane
Right.
concept.
I think there's, on that blue sheet, I think the number of home ownership units ranges from 12 to 35. I think 35 is
Oh, hi.
very high.
Yeah, no, that, like I said, that was just taking the
Right.
kind of the multipliers in the HVP and adding honestly, part of it was just round numbers also to, but the.
I think it's something like 6 to 12.
6 to 12 sounds
Habitat
doable,
specifically?
yeah.
Or for affordable.
For home ownership, 6 to 12, I think one of the largest habitat complex, or neighborhoods that they build is 12.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that should be our moderate to elevated.
Yep.
Everybody agrees.
Okay.
So, Drew, did you say you were done filibustering?
Yes.
Okay. No, he said he wanted to go to 429, and I just.
Changed my mind. I'm done.
Yeah, we don't have to vote cloture.
So Lee, anything else?
No, I think I spoke my mind very strongly earlier, so.
I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to open it up to the other people in the room?
Anybody else have?
You want to do your people on your committee online? They did.
We did.
They started.
We did them first.
We can circle back to them. Joanne and Pam, do you have anything else to add after listening to all of us?
Nothing else to add.
Joanne? Okay.
And then we have our town planner, Kathy Williams.
Okay. I guess I was envisioning not so much identifying the locations on the site that things would go, but developing the actual program. You know, the number of units, how much rental per home ownership, what percentage of affordable to market rate. You kind of talked about the different units of bedrooms, which is good. I'm assuming the unit sizes would meet your LIP requirements, so just like anything that goes to the MUC, you want to make sure that you have your minimum unit sizes. You know, do you want to limit the number of stories? Do you only want to have 2 stories as a maximum, something along those lines? 35 feet is kind of the maximum in our zoning, making sure that that's still adhering to you. You know, solar on the roof and solar canopies maybe over the parking lots. That might be a way of getting some of that solar back. You know, when someone's developing and designing something, do you have design standards that you want them to adhere to? So lots of times Mary and the Community Housing Committee says, you know, the architectural site design standards, or you need to meet the VCOD design standards, just to give people an idea when they're putting the blocks on the piece of paper, what kind of things we're generally looking for. And again, obviously the accessibility, you know, how much parking are you really looking for? I mean, if it's affordable, do you want 1 unit? I think, or 1 space per unit, that seems a little light because people have guests. Do you want to set any of those things? Because all of these things go into how someone would lay it out on on a piece of paper and match it with all these other ideas that they particularly have. Obviously, you're going to want some type of meaningful open space. Maybe the housing is around an open green. That could be where you have a playground, areas for gathering, that type of thing. You obviously want to have a robust landscaping and fencing. And you also want to make sure that you're meeting the fire and emergency vehicle access requirements. We've gotten got caught up a little bit sometimes making sure that the fire department has adequate access of getting their vehicles in and around, and it's changed some of the design. I don't know if you want to specify the minimum lot sizes for home ownership. I know you said 75. Maybe that's a bit small. Maybe you want to go with the quarter acre, just to give them an idea. If we're going to have these single-family homes, what kind of acreage would you guys feel comfortable with? And then obviously, sewer to the site. And you also might want to say things about, this all plays into the financing later, but you want to make sure that there's adequate stormwater, so you're not discharging extra nitrogen into the ground and all of these different things. And then, of course, water conservation. I don't know how specific you want it to be, but I think from a design standpoint, I would want to have all this information just to lay things out. Otherwise, I'd be guessing a little bit on what would be acceptable.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think time-wise, I think these are the kinds of things to get in once, if we've got a consensus on a basic conceptual footprint, then I think those are the kinds of things that you can go in. I think we have to take these in stages, in phases, and then go through those. We were given these little Lego blocks. Do we get to keep these, by the way? Yeah, the Lego blocks, the whole idea, at least my understanding, was we're coming together to figure out conceptually where we're going to develop the site and where we're going to lay things out.
We still don't have input from the other departments that have put their ideas together. So,
but
I think in terms of, my understanding was that we were starting to at least look at land use opportunities and on the site, and we'll get into a more developed discussion about parking and all of those things.
I think that the conversation sounds like, less density closer to the road, more density back in. Those are good information for them to have. But the MUC is hiring their own consultant who will be taking all of this information. So as much information on what you want that you can give to that consultant so that they can process it with everybody else's information and lay out the 3 different options is my recommendation.
Well, I think we're all in favor of fire access, right?
Right.
I think
I'm just saying, lots of times they don't put that, it looks really pretty in the picture, but then when you actually have to do it and you want to get the ladder truck around this 2-story building, it becomes a problem.
But I think we leave that to the consultants that we've hired to basically.
Concept of things that you want to make sure that get taken care of earlier rather than later, so you don't have a problem.
I read the recreation proposal, and they're using the entire site anyway.
Oh, really?
Well, economics is using the entire site.
I think that's really, those things are really good. I think that we should mention that we do have architectural and site design standards, right? Set the bar there. Look, we're not going to want a brick square building, right?
How many, do you have a maximum number of units per
So
building?
that's what I'm going to go, that's where I'm going to go.
That's important.
That's where I'm going to go right now.
Maximum number of units, yeah.
That's where I'm going to go. So right now I'm hearing home ownership, something like a habitat
6 to
development,
12.
6 to 12. I'm seeing the same range for the municipal rental units, Sharon.
Good for you, Mary.
Is that
Yes.
6 to 12, right?
Say that again?
Because we're
6
looking
to
for
12
moderate to elevated proposals. So for a habitat neighborhood, 6 to 12 units.
Right.
For the detached rental units, right? Luxury rental units.
What?
For municipal employees that are going to work
ones
here
on Chickadee.
forever. Yes, the Chickadee, 6 to 12 units,
Right,
right? Then the high density
okay.
area behind, where the school building,
Mark
the
first
Mattakey school
said it,
buildings are
yeah.
there now. We have right now 62 to the elevated 135. Now, the moderate, you really don't want to go below 62 because that's your annual housing production goal.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
that,
6 of those ownership would count toward it too, right?
no, I'm going, because to strike in 1 year to get your safe
Gotcha.
harbor, you really want to target your moderate level affordable housing rental development at 62 units. So what would be your elevated number? If your lower number is 62, what's your elevated? 85? 100, 115, 135?
I would go north of 135 myself.
Okay.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
you'll be surprised how much housing you can get in.
Really?
if
Okay.
I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, 12 to 16 units per acre or something like that, so it's a little less dense than Yarmouth Commons,
stories?
but, pardon?
2 stories.
Yeah, probably 2 stories. And
Oh, I think that you should really
You could go to
think
3
out of
and-
the box about the height, because you want to build up, not out.
Right.
Right? So we're proposing this in the southeast corner is far away from everybody, right? So you can bring the height up.
Yarmouth
When you
Commons.
go
Go at least 3 stories, no?
Yarmouth Commons does have a 3-story building. It's
Yeah.
off to
Yeah,
the side,
they've got
but the
it.
ones facing the roads are 2.
Right, they used to have, I think they were all 3-story at one time, and then the town comments, they backed off, but, yeah, you could go to 3 stories in some areas on the back of the site, maybe, and,
So how many units would we envision in that particular location?
62 minimum. What
Right.
you need to talk about, what would be your recommendation for an elevated?
I would recommend 3 stories. I would think 3 stories could fly there and get more density. People agree with that?
Absolutely. There's no reason not to do 3 stories this far set back.
Right?
right.
Correct. And how many units?
How does that calculate? You know?
I mean, I think
I do.
just to be, to roll back a little bit, I think, we have to just keep in mind this is going to be somewhat general at this point, because to do, I think, a lot more detailed design work is more extensive than 3 meetings. And so I think talking about things like the stories is very important to know that you're willing to go 3 stories, especially in the back of the site. I'm glad you brought up parking, because you've got to remember, once you start talking about 135 units, that's at least 135 parking spaces as well, so. But again, understanding that a lot of the examples that we've looked at in the, previous case study examples that we showed you, it was looking at the overall lot, which included the parking. So I think, I think what we're suggesting is reasonable, but it's going to be way down the line before actual detailed design work would come into play.
Do you want to play with this? Take a look at this, see if I got it right.
So I don't know how much 3 stories would make or break how much of the site you're taking up, offhand. But I do just want to ask also, I'm glad it was a clear consensus about the stories. Does anyone have feedback they want to share about parking? Even if that is, I agree, kind of, that's something that may come out more in further conversations, but does anyone feel strongly about? I know some people feel very strongly about there shouldn't be even 1 spot per unit, or there should be 2
Kathy,
spots per unit.
what is Yarmouth Commons, how many spots per unit do they have? Is it 1?
I think it might be 1.5 or
1.5. They promised us
Pretty
they
standard
would
when
not
you have
run out
mixed.
of parking spots, and they didn't.
Yeah, but that's 100% affordable.
But it's right
If we have a
on-
mixed
Right on the
market
bus
rate
line.
and
Right
mixed
on the
affordable,
bus
you're going to
line.
need more parking.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Parking spaces for people who come to use the athletic fields, people who
And the
come to
gymnasium and the
use
auditorium.
That was my dream,
No, you won't.
until we started talking about 135 units, and you're like, oh, I don't know. We'd have, yeah.
Parking for the units is separated for people coming.
Apartment parking.
Because you'll be using both uses on the weekends together. People will be living in
Yeah,
their houses.
so Simpkins School, same thing, that's senior housing, they didn't use all the parking spots that they thought. But here, you're gonna have people that are gonna need a car, because they're not on a bus route.
And need multiple cars per family.
I mean,
Yes.
So you don't have to have a hard answer on that, but if the trust or if any group has this, the housing committee as well, if you have a existing, I don't know, kind of philosophy about that. Some towns do have
1.5 spots per unit when there's a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units is generally a good guideline. I propose we stick with that.
Could we do solar over the parking lot?
I would love that.
Yes.
So actually, I'm glad that you raised that because we had also, at the beginning of the meeting, I think, Mr. Forrest, you had also touched on some of the other kind of the green building. What other things do you want us to include? It seems like the 62 unit for the moderate, the 135 potentially for the elevated, willing to go 3 stories, 6 to 12 for the affordable ownership on that southeastern corner. Also looking at for the municipal rental along Chickadee, 6 to 12 is what I'm also hearing. Looking at, what did I just lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, but are there other things that you would want to include in the proposal? Like we would absolutely want to see a housing proposal include solar on the roofs or solar above, as a parking lot canopy.
Habitat usually does solar on the new dwellings now,
Yep.
but the rentals could be a parking lot with
Said
that.
it.
I think
Green
everyone
energy.
generally is going to be very supportive of net zero.
Yep.
I think we should try to see what we can get for a development that sort of meets that goal. The other thing that we don't want to lose sight of is, as I think someone had mentioned earlier, the walking trails that are nearby. So we don't want to develop, we want to develop a plan that sort of takes use of those or directs people there. You'd hate to sort of cut off an area or do something that would limit access to a trail. You might want to take advantage of it. The other thing is that I think to the, on the northeastern corner of the site, it comes close to the Bayberry Hills Golf Course, doesn't it, Kathy?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and there may be some link to a walk, people will walk around that area. There may be a way to provide convenient access from the site.
Well, there's
over
a
to-
shared use pathway on Higgins Crow that goes up to where the extension of the Cape Cod Rail Trail is coming out to
There you
Higgins
go.
Crow.
Nice.
So it's a
Right.
good connection.
Yeah, so that'll be utilized, definitely.
So I think if everybody's in agreement with 1.5 parking spots for the residential, that would, I think, be a good starting point. I think the bigger, the open question is the parking for, we need to look at a detailed program of what's included in the recreation uses around the existing gym, the community uses and all of that. That's a big
Nebulous.
guess at this
But-
point.
Right.
But I think from the parking stuff for those uses, that's not the housing MUC's job, all right?
Right.
That's the way I look at it, it's somebody else's
But
job.
it's a space consideration.
Oh, no question about it. No, I don't disagree with that, but the thing is from my point of view, I think we've answered the question. 1.5.
The only one we can
Bingo.
answer.
1.5, but we want to make sure that people using the walking trail and so forth don't infringe on the parking spaces for the housing.
I mean, that's just an enforcement issue.
Right.
However.
I thought that there was some very out-of-the-box thoughts on the open space and water, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it now, that maybe we don't have to think about grass. Maybe we can think about,
Pollinated gardens.
pollinated gardens and other types of landscaping as opposed to
Good idea.
grass and seeds and watering and pollution and all that stuff, especially if we want to protect our water source and so forth. So if there's a way that any of that can be factored into any design, I just loved some of what they had in open space and water
So
supply.
what I think we should do for the affordable rental housing, right? Minimum 62, maximum twice that,
Yeah, which would be 124, which is actually what,
124.
right.
Now, why wouldn't, John mentioned he thought we could shoot a lot higher than that, but you don't
You're
think
saying
that's a
the
good
elevated
idea?
would be 124?
Yeah. I just don't think we
I
can,
think we should test it on the site and see what we can get. I don't.
Or
think we-
above?
I don't think we know right now.
I'm going to put or above.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think 124, again, there is a logical basis for it. It is based on the housing production plan. It is the target for a 2-year certification. And that depending on future work on site layout in the next phase of this process, maybe there's room for more, but more work would need to be done to see, with accommodating parking and whatnot. So we can say 124 or higher depending on future site. I think being
Architectural?
able to say that you want to maximize,
Well, or higher on, when you start doing conceptual layouts for the buildings and assuming 3 stories and that sort of thing will give us, be a better barometer of what that upper limit is.
right. So do you want it to say then, this would be another kind of final piece to make sure we're clear on the wording. For the elevated, do you want it to say 124 or up to like, the maximum that can reasonably fit in that area of the site with the parking considerations of 3 stories, that sort of thing? And that is a future, but so you're willing to go higher and you want to make that clear.
And it's mixed rental with at least 25% affordable, is that the game plan? I mean, that's what we have on here, I believe, or do we want to go higher for affordable?
Its minimum is 25%, so that we can get them all to count.
Right.
When you start to get to a development of that size, it's not something that our local funds can't subsidize all of it. Do you know what I mean? If we're in the range of 20 to 40 units, yes, we can subsidize something like that. If it gets any bigger, we have to draw on state and federal financing. And that determines the income levels. But I think that is like a discussion we have to have. We do have a housing bond bill of $6 billion for the state. There might be other products that they're offering, Architectural and site design standards, you guys are good with that, right? Senior friendly, right? Senior friendly.
What does that mean?
It means that we didn't want to make them designated age restricted, but we wanted to make the design and the units so that seniors that are so
I think that makes sense.
accessible, right? You have a 3-story building, you're talking about an elevator, on-site laundry.
Would that be called principles of universal design, or not so much?
Well,
The first floor living idea
Yeah.
is, I think crosses over into that.
And smaller units, right?
yeah.
To consider that.
If we have a high percentage of 3-bedroom units in the development, we're not gonna get our older households in there. So we need some studios, we need some smaller 1-bedrooms.
Sharon?
Could I ask one question about your typical RFPs? Do they, whatever you put in is okay? So if you put in workspace on the first floor, for people to have workspace on the first floor, can you put that in your RFP and that'll be what you get?
You will get responses that may or may not, they may say, yeah, that's not feasible, this is what we propose. But generally, you're going to get responses from developers who want to try to accommodate what you're asking for. But you might just get no responses if it's not feasible.
So
And
if you're
that has
talking about,
happened
if you're
sometimes.
talking about live work,
Yes.
yeah, that would be one of your, kind of like what I'm considering right now, the satellite housing areas. Do you know what I mean? You could do live work, but not in this high-density area that we're talking about right now. No, the financing won't
Because you
work.
have the 25% affordable, you can't put that in?
Financing won't work, but we can,
Financing won't work because the work
it's
thing is in there?
easier to have them separated, those, because they're distinctly 2 different types of housing units. One is live work.
Well, when
One
I
is
say live
purely-
work, I'm talking about what they did over in Hyannis near the CUDA Center. So they just had spaces that anybody that was in the apartment could come down and use as a workspace to
Yeah,
have
that-
someone come into their business. And that's the same thing as your live work, is that correct?
No,
No.
I was talking about, a live work is usually a completely independent.
I'm not talking that, I'm talking the CUDA Center.
Yeah, I don't
big
think we've
apartments.
discussed
Have you
that.
ever been in there?
What is it called? Sorry.
Oh, God. What's the name of them? Do you know the name of them, Mark?
No.
Do you know where the CUDA Center is?
No, how do you?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's
Yeah,
You
I
have
know.
to
what
spell
it is,
that
yeah.
out.
CUDA Center. It's on Wilkins, I think it's Wilkins Ave.
Okay.
It's off of Addicts. If you were going Independence and then took a right on Addicts going towards BJ's, it's one of the first roads on your right, Wilkins, and you'd go down, you'd see Cuda Center on your left, which is a Cape Cod
Medical
healthcare
center, yeah.
thing. And then further down on the left are the apartments. And they are expensive market apartments, don't get me wrong. But they have some interesting spaces so that the tenants within the building can come down and use and meet, you know, if they do a business and they want to meet a person, they have Wi-Fi, they have connections to cable or whatever, and seats and tables, and they can come down and have a business conversation. That's what I always thought that your live-work was, but,
Well, one of the things that the Economic Committee is looking at is things like that.
well, actually, that's what youth needs. You know, the youth that are going to rent these buildings, that's what they look for, you know, because they're doing a lot of entrepreneur stuff. And so I was trying to find out if your RFP
It's
would
nice to
allow
maybe have
that
a
to be put, and you put at least, 10, things on the first
We
floor,
would
which
have
gives
to-
up apartments, but it
We would
gives you-
have to, just like the Chickadee idea, we would have to find a spot for it
Yeah.
on the campus.
No, you couldn't do it within that mixed building?
Within the high density part, I don't want to conclusively say, but the
Well,
type.
you want people that can work, right? And
Oh,
they're-
absolutely. I think
So
that
an
idea would be
affordable-
embraced.
Why would they say no to that kind of affordable housing that has that mixed use of workspace? That's just, again,
Well, if there's something like
But I
that's
won't
going to be formed on the site, not particularly the housing site, but on the
part of
whole
the housing
campus.
is what you're saying.
I know what she's saying, but I'm saying if it's going to be elsewhere,
Can I just make one comment? I think it's very important if you guys are interested in having market rate. I think we have a huge need for additional market rate rental housing in the town of Yarmouth in addition to the affordable. So if you don't want this to be 100%, or you're okay with this being 100% affordable, you need to maybe say that, because I think when they start looking at the financing for this, there's going to be looking at different sources of money. But I think if you're looking at who are you trying to serve, yes, we have an affordable component, but we also want to serve the people who are just working and trying to find a place to live, and they just can't find a place.
So our affordable housing standards does say that we don't want any development to be 100% affordable.
We have two that are in town, so.
So I just want to clarify, I think when,
Finish my sentence,
Okay.
right? So what the standards say is 25% to 50%. So that, you guys could embrace that's your recommendation, that the minimum is 25% affordable for the rental housing, and that the maximum is 50%.
Okay.
That's already in their standards.
Okay, if that's, I just think
So
it's worth
are
stating
you guys
that.
comfortable with that being reiterated?
by the way,
You
they
rate this
offer
current
anybody to come
standards.
in and take a look. I mean, they're big on that, so you could drop in and say, oh, could I come and see your workspaces?
That sounds great.
Okay, we have to
It's
wind
429.
down.
yeah.
I don't think so.
so I think just in terms of clarifying the next
Oh.
steps.
Mix the bedrooms, right? Studios all the way up to 3 bedrooms, right?
So I think with the next steps, what we need to do is take this and write it up into like a 2-page proposal, taking all of this in. And then, Mary, would it make sense for each group at their next meetings to review, or maybe not their next, we'll talk about that, but like, because I
Let
don't.
me talk to the chairs
Okay, sure.
about what to do. I think that if the chairs don't see that there's enough consensus, that they'll call another meeting.
Okay, all right.
I have a feeling we have enough here to say we have consensus. Of course, we need to make sure that the other chair is okay with it.
Exactly. So there, we will be in touch with next steps, but we will be writing this 2-page memo going over, I think, what appears to be pretty great consensus.
Anything else?
You can adjourn.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second.
Second? Lee?
Absolutely.
Roll call, Lee?
Yes.
Trying to catch up on
John,
watching
yes.
and reading those things.
Yes.
And Pam?
Aye.
Okay, and Joanne, are you
Joanne.
still there?
You don't want these, do you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, adjourned.